On a snowy Christmas Eve, Molly, a kind-hearted woman in her early 30s, finds a young boy named Jesse, abandoned and shivering alone on a doorstep. Touched by his innocence and strength, she brings him into her family's holiday gathering, giving him a taste of warmth and love he's never known. But when news arrives of a distant relative who may claim custody, Molly faces a race against time to keep Jesse safe. Will she be able to protect this boy who's already stolen her heart? And what secrets from Jesse's past could still stand in their way? Snow blanketed the neighborhood in soft white layers, and the only sounds were the occasional squeals of laughter and Christmas music floating through open doors. Lights twinkled in windows, casting warm glows over festive wreaths and welcoming doormats. But outside one darkened, forgotten house on the street sat a little boy, alone on the steps, bundled in a thin coat, hugging himself for warmth. He was Jesse, just 6 years old, with soft curls poking out from under a worn cap and a face both too young and somehow old for his age. His eyes, wide and searching, drifted toward each passerby, as if he'd been left a promise that someone would come to find him. But Jesse had been waiting for hours, and now, shivering, he began to understand that perhaps no one was coming after all. In the midst of this scene, Molly, a warm-hearted young woman in her early 30s, hurried past with her hands full of wrapped gifts and a box of cookies balanced in her arms. She was heading to her sister's house, smiling to herself as she imagined the warm, bustling gathering waiting for her there. Her family would all be together, swapping stories, sharing memories. The only time of year they gathered like this. But then she stopped in her tracks. Her eyes were drawn to the small figure on the steps. A child. Her heart tightened. "Excuse me?" she called softly, stepping closer, her breath visible in the frosty air. "Are you waiting for someone?" The boy looked up, his wide brown eyes meeting hers. His small voice barely reached her ears. "My mom. She told me to wait here. Said she'd come back." He looked down at his feet, as if he couldn't quite believe it anymore. Molly felt her heart break a little. "How long have you been waiting, Jesse?" He shrugged, eyes focused on the pavement, but his cheeks were red from the cold. His hands tucked into the too thin sleeves of his coat. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him. "Come with me, Jesse. Let's get you warm, okay?" He nodded, and Molly gently guided him by the hand, carrying the burden of what must have been a terrible abandonment. She took him to her sister's house, where the family had already started celebrating. Inside, laughter and lights filled every corner, and the smell of freshly baked gingerbread welcomed them. As they entered, everyone fell silent, their eyes shifting from Molly to the little boy holding her hand. Her mother, always cautious, eyed him with a mix of curiosity and worry. "Molly, who's this?" she asked gently, setting down a plate of cookies. "This is Jesse," Molly replied, her voice soft but firm. "He's been left outside on his own." The family exchanged glances, unsure of how to react, but Molly's nephew Ethan, also 6, immediately ran over, grabbing Jesse's hand. "Come on, I have Legos. Want to play?" he asked, eyes sparkling. For a moment, Jesse's face softened, a small smile breaking through the confusion and sadness. As the evening progressed, Jesse's presence stirred something unexpected in everyone. Molly's brother, who had recently lost his job and was feeling low, found himself lifting Jesse onto his shoulders, cheering him on as they played a game of charades. Molly's sister, who had been worrying about her own children's safety and well-being, took a deep breath, realizing how lucky they were compared to the boy who'd been left on a snowy doorstep. But then, just as the atmosphere had finally warmed, a knock on the door interrupted their laughter. Molly opened it to find a stern-looking man in uniform, holding a file with Jesse's name on it. It seemed someone had reported him missing, but there was something more complicated in the man's expression. Molly's heart sank as she realized this might mean the end of Jesse's brief night of joy. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Would Jesse be taken away back into a world that seemed to have abandoned him once already? Inside the cozy, bustling house, Jesse sat by the fire, his small figure wrapped in a borrowed blanket, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. He looked almost peaceful, as though the warmth and comfort had finally allowed him to relax, even for a brief moment. Molly's family surrounded him, drawn to the child who had entered their Christmas celebration so unexpectedly. The man in uniform, who introduced himself as Officer Daniels, glanced around the room, his gaze serious but softening as he observed the family's obvious concern. "I'm here to take Jesse," he began in a low voice, not wanting to frighten the boy. He motioned Molly over to speak privately. "He was reported missing days ago. His mother, well, she's in a difficult situation." Molly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She sensed there was more to this than Jesse had been able to tell her. Daniels paused, clearly hesitant. "We don't know all the details, but his mother has been struggling. It appears she's dealing with some personal issues and hasn't been able to care for him as she should. But Jesse's situation is complicated. Right now, he has no other family to take him in." Molly's heart went out to Jesse. The thought of him alone, or even worse, going into an uncertain system, filled her with a surge of protectiveness. "Please, let him stay here, just for tonight," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "He doesn't need to be in a cold facility. It's Christmas Eve." Officer Daniels hesitated, glancing back at Jesse, who was now laughing at something Molly's nephew Ethan had said. Seeing the boy finally at ease, he sighed, rubbing his temples as if wrestling with a decision. "Just for tonight, then," he said, his voice softening. "But I'll have to be back tomorrow to take him in officially. It's procedure, you understand?" Molly nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and dread. Tomorrow. That would give her time to talk to Jesse, to find out what he wanted, and perhaps, just maybe, to think of a way to keep him safe. The evening continued, and soon, Jesse seemed like any other child, smiling and talking with Ethan, playing with toys, and basking in the warmth of the family's attention. Molly's mother, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach to life, sat watching Jesse closely, her face softened by an expression rarely seen by her children, something close to vulnerability. As the night wore on, the family grew quieter, enjoying the simple presence of one another. Molly's father, a quiet man with a stern look but a gentle heart, took the opportunity to sit beside Jesse, offering him a cookie from the plate he'd been holding all evening. "You know, I think I saw Santa fly by earlier," he said with a small smile, nodding toward the window. Jesse's eyes lit up, and he craned his neck to peer out into the snowy night. "Really? Did he bring the reindeer?" "Oh, he always does," Molly's father replied, casting a warm glance at Molly. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from the boy's shoulders. As the night deepened, Jesse started to grow tired. Molly noticed him rubbing his eyes and realized he hadn't had a proper place to sleep in who knew how long. Gently, she took his hand, guiding him upstairs to the guest bedroom where she'd prepared some blankets and pillows. As she tucked him in, Jesse looked up at her with an uncertain expression. "Will you be here in the morning?" he asked, his voice small. Molly swallowed, fighting back the wave of sadness that threatened to overwhelm her. "Yes, Jesse, I'll be here," she promised. "You'll be safe here tonight." She stroked his hair gently until he drifted off to sleep, feeling an ache in her heart she hadn't anticipated. The following morning, Christmas Day, dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow outside. Downstairs, the family had gathered around the tree, filling the room with quiet anticipation and chatter as they prepared for the festivities. But for Molly, the joy of the season was shadowed by the looming knowledge that Officer Daniels would return. When Jesse appeared at the top of the stairs, still groggy but smiling, Ethan ran over to him, grabbing his hand and leading him to the Christmas tree. "Look, Jesse! There's a present here for you!" Jesse's eyes widened as he took in the small, wrapped package with his name written in neat, looping letters. Molly hadn't wanted him to feel left out, so she'd wrapped a scarf and a small toy she'd found around the house, but she hadn't expected his face to light up the way it did. As he tore open the package, the entire family watched, moved by his pure, childlike joy. Molly's mother, who had been quietly observing Jessie all morning, turned to her daughter, her voice filled with quiet emotion. "He doesn't belong anywhere else, Molly. Not today, not ever," she said, her tone uncharacteristically tender. "Do what you can to keep him here." Molly's mind raced. Could it be possible to keep Jessie, at least temporarily? She felt a surge of determination. Glancing at the clock, she knew she didn't have much time before Officer Daniels arrived. When Daniels knocked at the door later that morning, he was met with Molly's steely gaze. She invited him in, her voice firm as she began to explain her thoughts. "Officer Daniels, I know you have a job to do," she started, taking a breath to steady herself. "But Jessie deserves a chance to feel safe and loved. Is there any way at all, that he could stay with us? Just for a little longer?" Officer Daniels looked thoughtful, clearly torn. "You know this isn't just up to me," he replied. "There are protocols, placements, things I can't control." But his gaze softened as he watched Jessie playing by the tree, laughing as Ethan showed him a new toy. "I'll see what I can do," he finally said, his tone gentle. "No promises, but I'll make some calls." As Daniels left, Molly felt a glimmer of hope, though it was fragile. The family gathered for Christmas dinner, but the sense of urgency lingered. After the meal, Molly took Jessie aside and tried to explain as gently as she could. "Jessie, the officer may need to take you somewhere else soon, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe, okay?" Jessie looked at her with a quiet understanding far beyond his years. "I don't mind where I go," he said, his voice steady. "But if I could stay with you, I'd like that." Molly's heart ached as she hugged him, feeling the weight of his word. She knew no matter what, she would fight for him. As the afternoon wore on, the house fell into a soft hush, filled with the faint sounds of Christmas music and laughter from the children playing in the living room. Molly felt every tick of the clock, each passing minute drawing her closer to the moment that Officer Daniels would call back with news she desperately wanted but feared wouldn't be good. Suddenly, Molly's phone buzzed. She glanced down to see a message from Officer Daniel. "Can you come down to the station? We need to discuss Jessie's situation." Her stomach twisted. What could this mean? She had hoped for more time, a chance to keep Jessie in her care. But this request made everything feel uncertain. She turned to her family, who'd been watching her with quiet concern. Her mother placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Go. We'll look after Jessie here. Whatever happens, remember you're not alone in this." Molly nodded, summoning her courage. And after hugging Jessie one last time, she left for the station. The streets outside were covered in a fresh layer of snow, the world pristine and silent under the soft glow of Christmas lights. Yet Molly's thoughts were anything but peaceful. She kept running through everything she could say to convince Daniels, any possible argument to keep Jessie safe and secure with her. At the station, Daniels greeted her with a serious expression, leading her to a small meeting room with beige walls and metal chairs. Molly sat, her fingers fidgeting as she awaited what felt like a judgment on both her and Jessie's future. Daniels finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. "We've been trying to contact Jessie's mother," he began, sitting across from her with a file in his hands. "But she's disappeared. The neighbors reported that she left town a week ago, and there's no sign of her returning soon. Given these circumstances, Jessie has to be placed into temporary custody." Molly felt her heart sink. "But there has to be another way," she pleaded. "He needs stability, a home, especially now, with everything he's been through." Daniels looked at her, his gaze unexpectedly sympathetic. "There is one option," he said slowly, as though weighing his words carefully. "If you're serious about keeping him, you could consider applying to foster him. It's a commitment, though. You'd need to prove you're willing to take care of him for the long term." Molly's pulse quickened. Fostering. The idea filled her with equal parts fear and determination. Could she really step into this role, become a guardian to a boy she had only just met? But she knew deep down that she couldn't turn away. Jessie was alone, and he needed someone to stand up for him. Someone to promise him he would no longer be left behind. "Yes," she said firmly, meeting Daniel's gaze without hesitation. "I want to apply to foster him." Daniels nodded, looking almost relieved. Then there's a process we need to begin. Background checks, home evaluations, the whole protocol. He paused. It won't be easy, Molly. But if you're serious, I'll do everything in my power to support your application. Back at the house, Jesse sat at the window, his small face pressed against the cold glass, watching for any sign of Molly's return. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he sensed that something big was about to change. Molly's mother, noticing his worried look, came over to sit beside him. "She'll be back soon," she reassured him, patting his hand. "Molly's doing everything she can to make sure you're safe." Jesse nodded, looking down at his lap. "Will she leave like my mom did?" The question hung heavy in the air. Molly's mother took a steadying breath, uncertain of what to say, but she chose honesty. "I don't know everything, sweetheart, but I know Molly, and if she's promised you something, she'll keep it. You can trust her." When Molly finally returned that evening, her family met her with expectant, hopeful faces. Jesse looked up, his eyes wide and searching as she stepped through the door. She knelt down beside him, pulling him into a gentle hug. "Jesse, I'm going to try to make sure you can stay with us," she said, her voice firm but filled with warmth. "I'm going to do everything I can to keep you here." Jesse hugged her back, his small arms tight around her neck, and for the first time since she'd found him, he let out a soft, relieved sigh. Molly held him close, feeling the weight of her decision settle over her. This was no small undertaking, but every fear she'd felt earlier faded in the face of this boy's trust. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of paperwork, background checks, and interviews. Daniels arranged for a quick evaluation, impressed by Molly's determination and the family's support. It seemed that everyone was rooting for her and Jesse, but the process wasn't without its hurdles. Bureaucracy weighed heavily, with questions about her job, her finances, and her ability to provide for a young child. Each challenge felt like a test of her commitment, but each one also strengthened her resolve. Meanwhile, back at the house, Jesse was beginning to settle into his new life, taking comfort in small things he'd never experienced before. Waking up to the smell of pancakes, playing games with Ethan in the evenings, and curling up with a soft blanket to watch holiday movies with Molly and her family. He laughed more each day, his smiles coming more easily, his fears slowly melting away. But just as it seemed that things were settling down, a call came that threatened to undo everything. A relative of Jesse's mother, someone no one had known about, had been located. The news arrived without warning, throwing Molly into a panic. Would this unknown family member want to take Jesse in? Was this person even prepared to provide a safe and loving environment for him? Molly's fears grew, and her family worried alongside her, their newfound happiness with Jesse feeling fragile. All her efforts, her promises, her plans for their future together, it all now hung in the balance. Daniels himself seemed torn, uncertain of what would happen next. "The relative has a legal right to claim custody if they choose," he explained, "but we're assessing everything carefully." The news threw Jesse into confusion. He hadn't asked for much in his young life, just a place where he could feel safe, and he'd finally found it. One evening, he looked up at Molly, his eyes full of questions he couldn't voice. "Will I have to leave?" he asked in a small, worried voice. Molly held his gaze, her voice trembling with the weight of her promise. "I don't know, Jesse, but I promise I will fight for you. No matter what, I won't give up." In a tense meeting with Daniels, Molly made her case. "I've been here for Jesse," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "I'm ready to be the family he deserves. I know a stranger may have legal rights, but Jesse deserves stability. He's already been through so much." Daniels listened, a thoughtful look in his eyes, and then he nodded. "Molly, I believe you," he said, his voice filled with a quiet strength. "And I'll do what I can to make sure Jesse's future is the one he deserved." The decision would take time, Daniels explained, but Molly left the station with renewed hope. She had given everything she had to prove herself, and now all that remained was to wait, and to hold on to Jesse with all the love she could muster, no matter what the future held. Winter held its quiet magic over the town as days turned into weeks, each one bringing Molly and Jessie closer to an uncertain future. Yet amid the waiting and tension, they'd settled into a life that felt, to both of them, as if it was meant to be. Every morning, Molly would wake to find Jessie bounding down the stairs with Ethan, their voices filling the house with laughter. It was a routine Jessie had never known, a stability he clung to with all the wonder of a child who'd finally found a home. Yet in Molly's heart, the anxiety never fully left. She knew they were living on borrowed time. Despite Officer Daniels's best efforts to advocate on her behalf, the decision was out of his hands. It would come down to a meeting with a judge. Molly had been dreading this day, not knowing if the relative who had appeared so suddenly would stand in her way of becoming Jessie's legal guardian. On the morning of the hearing, Molly dressed Jessie carefully, her hands steadying his small shoulders as she helped him into his coat. He looked up at her with trusting eyes, seeming to sense the gravity of the day. "Will they let me stay with you?" he asked quietly. Molly's heart clenched, but she gave him a reassuring smile. "No matter what happens, Jessie, you're part of our family now, and I'll always be here for you." They arrived at the courthouse, Molly's family waiting outside the doors, each face reflecting the same mixture of hope and fear. Molly felt a surge of strength knowing they were there, silently rooting for her and Jessie. She took a deep breath, guiding Jessie by the hand as they entered the room. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with expectation. The relative, a distant cousin from another state, was there. A man in his 50s with a reserved, unreadable expression. Molly caught her breath as she glanced at him, wondering if he'd come to claim Jessie out of duty or love. The judge, a woman with a calm but firm demeanor, looked over her notes before glancing at Molly. "Ms. Rivers, I understand you've expressed interest in fostering Jessie permanently," she began, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor," Molly replied, her voice unwavering. She explained her connection to Jessie, her intentions, and her belief that he deserved a family that would love and support him without question. The judge listened intently, nodding as Molly spoke, her expression one of thoughtful consideration. Then it was the cousin's turn to speak. He cleared his throat, glancing between the judge and Molly before finally addressing the court. "I won't lie," he admitted, his voice gruff. "I didn't know Jessie existed until recently. I'm not prepared to take him in, but I believe family is important. I thought maybe I should be the one to care for him, but..." His gaze softened as he looked at Jessie, who clung to Molly's hand. "It's clear he's already found his family here. I won't stand in the way." A collective breath was released in the room, the tension breaking like a spell. Molly felt tears prick her eyes, unable to fully believe what she'd just heard. Jessie, sensing something significant had happened, looked up at her with a hopeful smile. "Does this mean..." The judge nodded, smiling slightly as she addressed Jessie. "Young man, it looks like you're going to stay with Ms. Rivers." She turned back to Molly, her tone warm. "Congratulations, Ms. Rivers. Your application for guardianship is approved. Take good care of him." In that instant, all the weight of the past few weeks lifted, and Molly felt nothing but relief and gratitude. She knelt down, pulling Jessie into her arms as he wrapped his little arms around her neck, both of them holding each other as if they'd known all along this was how their story would end. That evening, they returned to the house, greeted by Molly's family with cheers and hugs, the relief evident on every face. Christmas lights still adorned the house, casting a warm glow over the scene as Jessie ran to his new room, laughing as he pulled Ethan along with him, finally free to believe in the security of his new life. Molly's mother wrapped an arm around her daughter, a rare softness in her eyes. "I knew you'd make it work," she whispered. "You did good, Molly." The days that followed were filled with the quiet joy of ordinary life. Molly settled into her role as Jessie's guardian, each moment revealing just how much she'd been waiting for this chance, this purpose without even knowing it. She taught him how to cook, helped him with homework, and watched as he grew more comfortable, his trust and love for her deepening with each passing day. And as winter melted into spring, the scars of Jessie's past began to fade, replaced by the warmth and love of a family that cherished him. In the end, it wasn't a grand gesture or a sudden revelation that cemented their bond. It was the simple, everyday moments, the shared laughter, the bedtime stories, and the unconditional love that wrapped around Jesse like the softest of blankets, promising that he would never again be left out in the cold. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe to join us at HeroKind Stories. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances and the magic of family. And if you love this tale, click on our next video. It's another story that will warm your heart and renew your faith in the kindness that connects us all.